So have you ever heard of Martin Shkreli? It's been said that in 2015 he was the most hated man in all of America. Well, Martin owns a pharmaceutical company, and what he did is he took an undervalued drug, then he jacked up the price from $13.50 to $750 a pill. Now this was essentially a 4,000% mark. Today, we're talking about drug patents and how drug companies set their prices.
And then he cabled me and said, "I've got insulin, it works, come home quick." We ran out of insulin too. Some of our patients who had been treated and were well died from lack of insulin. That was a hectic time, particularly for me, because I was supposed to make it again, and of course we did rediscover how to do it, and the secret can never be lost.
All right, let's start today's conversation with how drug patents work. Now, when a drug company decides it wants to develop a new drug, it can take up to 14 years of research and development. And in today's numbers, that can cost as much as $2 billion, well, US dollars, before it's ever seen into fruition. Once a drug is created, it immediately applies for a drug patent. And what a patent does is it gives the inventor of the drug the right to exclude all others from making, using, or selling their invention without approval for a period of time. Now, in relation to pharmaceuticals, patents protect drug companies from other entities making and selling a copycat version of their drug for at least up to 20 years. Once the patent is expired, it no longer has an exclusive right to manufacture and distribute that drug without competition. Now at this time, other manufacturers can get into the game. And what they'll do is they'll attempt to take advantage of the original drug's success by creating lower priced generic versions. And this in turn will draw the prices down. And normally whenever there is more than one company fighting for your pocketbook, you can usually expect one of those companies to begin to lowball the other companies by setting the prices much lower in order to gain market share. But in the case of insulin, it appears as if the three major companies, Novo, Eli, and Sanofi, have all raised their prices exponentially during the same duration. But why? It's been 100 years. Aren't they scared new companies are coming in to undercut them? Well, first let's talk about extensions. Health authority approval, either through the FDA or the EMA, depending on whether you live in the United States or the UK, can take as much as 8 years before the drug ever hits the shelves. Now, once it's approved, the drug is then legal for sale and distribution. So in theory, the drug patent in the US may be as short as 12 years if the FDA drags their feet during the approval process of clinical testing and regulatory review. Now, the original patent timeframe is crucial to the inventors because what it does is it gives them the opportunity to attempt to recoup much of the costs associated with the drug's initial development. But if the approved drug sales were hindered at any point during the first 20 years due to the approval process, then they can apply for an extension on the original patent. Yet, the total patent term, including the extension, cannot exceed more than 14 years following the regulatory approval. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, but stay with me. Now, this is where the game of patent extensions starts, and it's called evergreening. So there's really two major classes of drugs that apply for patent. First, there are small molecule drugs, which are mostly comprised of drugs that you will see in a pill form. Now, in the case of small molecules, once the patent has expired, a chemical generic brand can be produced at a lower cost as long as the new drug is found to have a similar chemical makeup with the same results. Now, with a biological drug like insulin, the scientists have to create a way to make living cells act just like the original drug without completely copying the original. And this can prove to be extremely difficult. So what the drug companies do is they'll make small changes to the original drug in order to gain more extensions. And it doesn't matter how minute these changes are. If the drug is in a pill form, they might go as far as saying, before you had to take 3 pills a day, now we made it so that you only have to take 1 pill a day. And basically they just changed the capsule size, and yet they got an additional 20 years out of that patent. And what this does is it allows them to keep the drug competition limited and the market cornered for themselves. Now let's talk about how they set prices. Now when it comes to setting prices, there are a lot of variables involved. So what I want to cover first is out-of-pocket pricing. So when it comes to out-of-pocket pricing, there's basically a flow chart, and I'll put that up for you. As you see to the left, there is your manufacturer list price. And those are set by the drug companies like Eli Lilly, Novo, and Sanofi. So in order to start the distribution process, they need wholesalers. And what these guys do is they buy large volume from manufacturers at discounts. Now, when it comes to wholesalers, it's another three-headed monster. There's basically three companies that own 99% of the market. And that is AmerisourceBergen Corp, Cardinal Health, and McKesson Corp. And I don't know if you could tell, but this building right here, right behind me, that's Cardinal Health. It's huge, and I'm standing outside it like a weirdo doing a vlog. Anyways, back to hiding in the grass. And so what the manufacturer does is it drops the price for the wholesaler because they're buying at volume. So say the list price was $1.50 per pill, but the wholesaler says, well, we want to buy it at $1, but we're going to buy 1 million units, so here's $1 million. So next, the wholesaler will in turn begin to distribute these to pharmacies. And the pharmacies are basically like your CVS or your Walgreens. So if the wholesaler bought it at $1, he'll sell it back to Walgreens for $1.30, and we'll buy it at like $4 a pill, or if it's insulin, it's like $450,000 per vial. Now the problem is the list price. Follow me. It didn't take long for these big three to begin to raise the list price of insulin. In fact, as early as 1941, there was already an accusation of illegal antitrust violations for overcharging for insulin to make record profits. And these accusations were for Eli Lilly, Sharp and Dohme, and E.R. Squibb and Sons. They were indicted for conspiracy to unlawfully create an arbitrary, non-competitive price for insulin. Well, surprise, surprise. All right, so that's how the list price and the out-of-pocket price works. Next, I want to talk about the insured path to cost, and this is primarily in the US. This is where it gets just crazy. So in 1968, something insane happened. The first PBM was introduced. Now, a PBM is a pharmacy benefit manager, and his or her role is essentially to be a middle service between drug markets and the end payer. The end payer is basically any entity that offers health insurance, like insurance companies, your employer, or state or federal governments. Now, the PBM's job is to negotiate to lower these prices on the insurer's behalf. And this was an amazing thing because it meant lower drug prices universally, as well as lower copays for the insured consumer. The PBM companies became extremely resourceful, and many large corporations began to flock to them in order to benefit from their services and their powers of negotiation. But soon, greed set in, and the PBMs began to think up new strategies in order to gain higher profits. They created what's called a formulary. A formulary is a list of prescription drugs approved by the insurance for reimbursement. Now, this is a type of A-list that essentially makes a drug more desirable on a person's healthcare plan. And the higher it was on the list, the more likely it was to be purchased. So instead of determining what drug companies had a great product at a low price, they instead began to ask the question, what drug companies are most desperate to be on the top of my A-list? So what the PBMs did then is they invented a legal bribe, or a kind of kickback, called a rebate. And since there are no checks and balances on these rebates, the PBMs can approve whatever drug they want to be covered, regardless of the price. And initially, this was proposed as something that could be passed down to the insurance companies in order to further reduce copays. But since the amount of these rebates do not have to be disclosed to the insurance companies, the PBMs can pocket as much of that money as they want from the rebate, and no one would be the wiser. Now, currently, there are, of course, 3 major PBMs worldwide that cover anywhere from 75 to 85% of the market share. They are Express Scripts, CVS Health, and Optum Rx, also known as United Health, also known as Catamaran. These PBMs were so desired that in fact Eli Lilly tried to own their own PBM in the 1990s, but the Federal Trade Commission stepped in and stopped them. Okay, so here's where it gets real. So how do the PBM negotiations drive the price of medications? Well, firstly, it gives the drug manufacturers an incentive to hike prices. The drug companies know that as long as the rebates are worth the PBM's time, the PBM will in turn ensure that the drug makers make the top of the A list, the formulary list, regardless of the price. So here's a quick example. Say there's a premium drug that's being sold for $10,000 a vial with a $4,000 rebate. Now, on the other hand, someone else is selling an amazing biosimilar drug for $3,000 a vial with a $1,000 rebate. Now, the biosimilar can't compare with the premium drug, which offers a rebate that's higher than the original price of the biosimilar itself. So guess which drug is going to make the formulary list? The premium drug. Guess what company will probably raise prices again for the next 10 years, especially if they've been awarded a patent or a line extension? All right, back to the pharma bro, Martin Shkreli. The guy that everyone in America, including the Wu-Tang Clan themselves, hated, but that's a different issue. So last week, it was reported that Shkreli is now being sued by the Federal Trade Commission and the New York Attorney General. Yeah, the FTC, the same dudes that shut down Lilly's attempt to buy a PBM, they're now suing a guy who is actually in prison already for a different thing because he hiked his prices so high. They are seeking to hand the pharma bro a lifetime ban from the pharmaceutical industry itself. But why is it okay for insulin manufacturers to bleed out their patients like stuffed pigs? Why hasn't anybody stood up with $1 in their hand and said, hey, remember when this was about treating people and not dollars? But I have really only one question for you, and that is, who do you think is in the wrong here? Is it the drug companies for hiking their initial price? Is it the middlemen, the AKA PBMs, that the drug companies now need to budget for when setting their price? Or perhaps it's the system altogether. France, Germany, and the UK negotiate with pharma companies directly, and they've done so with much success. But that's a conversation for next week when we talk about governments and what they're doing to stop big pharma from killing us with cost.